Hi folks, welcome to today's Diggin' video. I'm Shawn, an interpreter at the Missouri Botanical Garden. In today's Diggin' video, we are going to be digging into the role that plants have played and continue to play in making paper. Oh, paper. You know, it is so inexpensive and so ubiquitous today, we take it for granted. But we use paper for all sorts of things. And paper, there's just so many varieties depending on our needs, not to mention our resources. Yes, paper. It might be cheap and it might be taken for granted, but it is so important to us. Paper wasn't always around for people to use. What did folks do before paper? Well, they turned to the earth itself to begin with. About 100,000 years ago, folks would have drawn on caves using some kind of ink that they had prepared from earth pigments. In ancient Sumeria, clay was found in abundance. Clay tablets were used, just large blocks of clay that would have been carved in. But that did not make it very convenient to try to communicate over distances. So eventually folks turned to something called ostraca. Ostraca were smaller stones or shards of pottery that could be written on or carved into, and then they could be transported. They were used, for instance, during times of war because then you could take a message and bring a message back. They were also used to record payment, making them perhaps the very first receipts ever used.
Early forms of communication also used organic material. Be it plant or animal, the resources used by a given person was relative on what was available in their area. Probably best known is papyrus, made from strips of stock of the plant Cypress papyrus. It was mainly used for the ancient Egyptians for commercial export, mainly to the Romans. Then there's amate, a pseudo-paper made from fig trees. It was mainly used in Latin America cultures such as the Aztec and Mayans. There's also tapa cloth, mainly associated with Polynesian cultures on islands such as Tonga, Samoa, Hawaii, and Tahiti. It was made from the bark from various trees growing on those islands, such as the paper mulberry tree. There's also in Asia, bamboo. They would take bamboo strips and tie them together to make bamboo scrolls. And on those could be held messages either scratched into the surface or drawn onto it. There's also parchment, which is made from animal skin. We're familiar with parchment through its use on the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. Parchment really began to pick up in popularity during medieval Europe, when Christian communities started to use it in their codex book structures.
Hi folks, my name is Em and I'm an interpreter with the Missouri Botanical Garden. Today I am joined by Susie Cobbledick, who is the Ellerman Book and Paper Conservator at the Peter H. Raven Library at the Missouri Botanical Garden. Thanks for joining me today, Susie.
It's a pleasure. We have one of the larger and more important botanical collections in the world here, and it is my job to take care of all the materials in this collection. In other words, I take care of a lot of paper.
So what kind of paper do you primarily see in the rare book collection in the library?
Well, the rare book collection contains the oldest papers that are in the collection. They date back to the late 15th century. So most of these papers are handmade rag papers. That means that they were made out of cotton, linen, and hemp rag, and then made by hand using a traditional method. That's what most papers were in Europe up until around the middle of the 19th century. There's a great deal of continuity, and actually over the course of several hundred years, those papers changed very little.
Wow, that's interesting. So can you speak a little bit on how the paper that was used then differs from the paper that we use today?
Yes, there are quite a few differences. A lot of things changed around 1800. Paper had been made the same way for many hundreds of years in the West until there was a greater demand for paper than the current methods could provide. At that point, a lot of entrepreneurs and inventors tried to find ways to speed up production. First of all, a paper making machine was invented around 1798. That changed the character of paper a lot because the sizing that was used to make the paper had to change. Size is a substance added to paper to make it somewhat impervious to water. Handmade papers were made with gelatin size, and machine-made papers couldn't be made with gelatin size. So instead, the paper makers invented what's called alum rosin size that actually changed the chemistry of the paper. So papers that are made with that kind of sizing will become brittle or yellowed. And the second big change that occurred was the use of wood pulps to make paper. And just like the new industrial size, wood pulp contains a lot of impurities that make paper brittle and acidic. So today, papers are primarily made out of wood pulps. However, in the course of time, paper makers figured out that those impurities in wood pulp caused harm to the paper, and they devised ways of removing them. So the only thing that we had left that was a problem was the alum rosin size. But in the 1980s, it started phasing out and being replaced with chemical sizes that don't harm the paper. So the average piece of paper that we see today is a machine-made paper made out of wood pulp, and it has one of these new chemical sizes. So actually, those papers are very good papers and will probably last for many hundreds of years.
With those differences, do you have different challenges conserving these different types of papers?
Absolutely. The oldest papers in the collection are usually the ones in the best condition, but where we really run into problems is when we get into those machine-made wood pulp papers. Conservators have ways of treating machine-made wood pulp papers. Washing in water, for example, removes impurities from these papers and neutralizes acids. We often see the wash water turn a rather disgusting yellow color as these impurities come out. We can also add an alkaline salt, like a calcium carbonate, to the final wash to add what is called an alkaline reserve that will neutralize acids for years into the future. 19th and early 20th century machine-made papers are also very often in need of repair. Conservators mend damaged paper using Asian-style tissues, which are thin enough to read through, but also very strong, and we use starch paste as an adhesive. These treatments help to stabilize these fragile papers so that library users can handle them and helps preserve them for future use.
We're just so grateful for everything you do, because without you, we know all of our paper would not be how it is today. So thank you again so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's work that I enjoy very much.
Let's think about rag paper for a moment. Rag paper comes from fibers that have been processed twice. First, fibers made into a textile, then those fibers reduced to make a paper. The fabric used in rag paper could either come from well-worn, no longer wearable fabric, or scraps from making garments. The fibers inside rag paper often comes from hemp, cotton, and linen. First, hemp. Bowstring hemp is often used to make rope. It is in the dogbane family and is native to Missouri. Next is cotton. Upland cotton is the species of cotton most often used in commercial manufacturing of fabric for clothes and for rag paper. Different species of cotton have different lengths of staples. A staple is the length of fiber. A long staple makes a strong, durable paper. Finally, linen. Commercial linen is made from a species of flax plant called annual flax.
According to the U.S. Bureau of Engraving and Printing, U.S. paper currency is made out of 75% cotton and 25% linen, which gives it its unique appearance, durability, and texture. The cotton fibers give it its folding strength, while the linen fibers give it its tensile strength, which allows it to resist tearing. This is why paper currency can go through the wash and come out intact, unlike other paper products such as tissue that wind up in 1,000 different pieces all over your nice clean clothes. And speaking of clothes, a fun fact, U.S. paper currency was once made out of recycled clothes, such as things like jeans. While people once had absolutely no paper to use, we now have oodles of varieties of paper to use that come at different prices and all have different purposes. Who would have thought that something as simple as paper would turn out to be so complicated? Thank you for joining us today. Until next time, so long from the Missouri Botanical Garden.